John had always known the Valrian were formidable, but as he stood in front of their imposing stronghold, he felt the weight of what he was about to face. This was no ordinary fortress. The sleek, towering structure shimmered under the eerie red sky, a symbol of the aliens' technological superiority. It was a place of death, of AI-driven sentinels and robotic warriors, machines built to erase any trace of humanity from the galaxy. His mission was simple: infiltrate, activate the Excalibur Protocol, and stop the alien eye from destroying Earth once and for all. But simple wasn't a word that fit the reality of this task. John glanced at the surrounding terrain, scanning for any sign of movement. His cloaking device was working, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The Valrian's advanced tech could detect even the smallest anomaly, and John was on borrowed time. A faint hum of static echoed in his ear as he activated the cloaking system, his body vanishing into the shadows. Every step he took was a calculated risk, but he had no choice. Failure wasn't an option. Earth's future depended on this moment. The silence around him was deafening. As he approached the heavily guarded entry, his heart pounded in his chest. The high-tech defenses of the Valrian stronghold were impressive, yet humanity had always found a way through impossible odds. John's breath quickened. He knew the hardest part of the mission wasn't infiltrating the fortress. It was surviving long enough to complete it. He moved swiftly, weaving between the patrols of alien soldiers who stood frozen in place like statues, waiting for the slightest sign of danger. Each soldier wore black, chrome armor, their glowing blue eyes scanning the horizon. They were programmed to follow orders without hesitation, and they would kill anything that wasn't one of their own. John's fingers tightened around his rifle, his pulse steady but his mind alert. He had to make it past them, without drawing attention, without failing. Reaching the entrance to the central chamber, John crouched low, careful not to make a sound. The door before him slid open with a faint hiss, revealing the dark interior of the stronghold. A soft click from his wristband signaled the activation of his secondary cloaking device. It would only last for a few moments, but it was enough. John slipped inside, his movements silent, like a shadow stalking its prey. Inside, the fortress was even more intimidating. Towering pillars of metallic alloy stretched up to the ceiling, where a network of glowing blue lights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows across the walls. The air was cold, artificial, and smelled faintly of burned ozone. The Excalibur Protocol was somewhere deep within the structure, hidden in the heart of the enemy's power grid. But getting there wouldn't be easy. Every corner was a potential death trap. John crept through the halls, every step deliberate, his mind focused. He reached a junction where a small patrol of Valrian soldiers stood, their backs to him. They were talking in low, robotic tones. For a moment, John considered waiting them out, but then one of the soldiers turned around, his head snapping toward John's direction. Time slowed as John's instincts kicked in. There was no way out. He couldn't retreat. He had to act. In an instant, John dropped his cloaking device and launched himself at the nearest soldier. His rifle swung in a smooth arc, hitting the soldier's neck with a sickening crunch. The creature crumpled to the ground, its blue eyes fading as it powered down. But the other two were already turning toward him, their weapons raised. John didn't hesitate. He dove into the nearest cover, narrowly dodging a volley of laser fire. The heat from the blasts singed the air around him. His heart raced as he fired back, the rifle's recoil pushing him back into the shadows. One soldier went down with a shot to the chest, sparks flying from its damaged circuits. The second soldier rushed forward, its bladed arms gleaming in the dim light. John's pulse hammered in his ears. He had seconds to act. He holstered his rifle and drew a combat knife from his belt, its handle cold against his palm. With a quick motion, he lunged, ducking under the alien's swing and delivering a quick slash to its throat. The creature let out a robotic screech before crumpling to the floor. The Sci-Fi adapted. The second wave advanced, learning from the ambush, their movements sharper, faster. They didn't retreat. They never did. A sudden impact shook the ship. Alarm sirens blared. "Shields failing," a human officer shouted. "They're targeting our engines." Veilzura gritted her teeth. "Then we fight harder." She grabbed her blade and turned to leave. Elias frowned. "Where the hell are you going?" "To war," she said simply. He cursed under his breath but followed. The corridors of the warship became a battlefield. Sci-Fi drones had breached the hull, pouring in like insects. They moved with terrifying precision, their metal limbs slicing through soldiers, their red eyes glowing with cold calculation. Veilzura moved like a storm. Her blade sliced through steel and circuitry, sparks flying with every strike. She had spent her life fighting flesh and blood enemies. But these were something else. Elias fought beside her, his rifle blazing. He was fast, precise, his movements honed by years of battle. For the first time, they weren't fighting against each other. They were fighting as one. More drones poured in, a metallic nightmare, endless and relentless. "We can't hold this position," Elias shouted. Veilzura growled in frustration. "Then we take the fight to them." She slammed her fist against the emergency hatch, forcing it open. Beyond it, the ship's exterior stretched into space, gravity locks keeping them grounded. Elias stared at her. "You're insane." She smirked. "You humans aren't the only ones who take risks." She leaped into the void, her boots magnetizing to the ship's surface. The battle raged around her, warships colliding, debris floating in the darkness. She sprinted forward, dodging enemy fire, slicing through drones with brutal efficiency. Elias followed, cursing the entire way. They fought their way to the Sci-Fi boarding craft, cutting down the last of the invaders. The moment the final drone fell, the battlefield changed. The human and Zarethi fleets, inspired by the brutal resistance, pushed forward. The Sci-Fi, for the first time, hesitated. Elias grinned. "We're winning." Veilzura wasn't so sure. She looked beyond the battlefield, at the stars. Something felt wrong. And then she saw it. A new Sci-Fi ship emerged from the darkness. Bigger, deadlier. Unlike anything they had faced before, its surface pulsed with unnatural energy, and as it moved, space itself seemed to warp around it. Veilzura's breath caught in her throat. Elias whispered, "Oh, hell." The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. I had no idea if Liam's plan would work, but there was no time to question it. Dara and Max took off, moving quickly to engage the creature. Max was shouting at it, trying to get its attention, while Dara darted around, staying light on her feet. The creature turned, its attention fixed on them as it snarled. Liam motioned for me to follow him. "We have to find its weak spot," he whispered urgently. "Stay close." I nodded, my heart racing. The next few moments felt like a blur of adrenaline and fear. We darted around the creature, trying to find any weakness in its defenses. It wasn't easy. Its thick scales protected most of its body. But Liam seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He pointed to a gap between the creature's scales, just above its leg. "Now," Liam yelled. With everything I had, I threw the rock I had picked up, aiming for the gap. It hit the creature with a dull thud, but it was enough. The creature screamed in pain, turning its attention toward us. "We've got its attention," Liam shouted. "Now move." We ran, barely avoiding the creature's massive claws. This was only the beginning, but I realized something important in that moment. We could survive if we worked together. We didn't have all the answers, but by trusting each other and thinking quickly, we had managed to survive the first real test of this strange world. And this was just the beginning. The ground still shook beneath us as the creature roared in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop us. We had managed to land a hit, and for that brief moment we felt a spark of hope. But as the creature turned to face us, fury in its glowing red eyes, I realized that this was just the beginning of our challenges. Max was panting hard, his face flushed with adrenaline. "That thing is huge," he said, barely able to catch his breath. How are we supposed to fight something like that? Dara didn't look shaken at all. Her eyes were sharp, focused. We don't need to fight it head-on, she said calmly, her voice steady despite the danger around us. We need to outsmart it. Liam was already moving, looking for an escape route. He pointed to the left. There's a canyon ahead. If we can make it there, we can regroup and figure out what to do next. But we have to move now. With no time to waste, we started running toward the canyon. Behind us, the creature screeched, and the ground trembled with every step it took. Its enormous claws scraped against the ground, and I could hear its breath growing louder as it gained on us. But we couldn't afford to stop. We had to keep going. As we ran, the rocky terrain made it difficult to keep our footing. The rocks were loose, and every step seemed to send them tumbling down the slope. I tried not to think about the creature chasing us. If we could just get to the canyon, we might have a chance to catch our breath and figure out our next move. Finally, we reached the canyon's edge, and we all stopped, panting heavily. The wide chasm stretched out before us, the rocky walls rising steeply on either side. It wasn't an ideal place to stop, but it was the only option we had. We can't just stay here, Max said, still breathing hard. That thing's going to catch us if we don't do something. We need a plan, Dara said. We can't just run forever. It's not about outrunning the creature. It's about using the terrain to our advantage. I looked over at the canyon. The walls were too steep to climb, but I noticed something strange. The ground around the canyon was covered in a strange, sticky substance. It wasn't mud, but it had the same texture. As I crouched down to take a closer look, I realized that it was something alive, like a thick web, but made of something that pulsed and moved on its own. This stuff, I said, standing up and pointing at the strange material. It's like a trap. I think it's trying to capture us. Liam looked at it closely. It's a creature's web, he said, his voice filled with realization. That explains the shaking earlier. The creature we just fought probably isn't the only thing out here. There are other dangers lurking. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. If this web was some kind of trap, then there might be more creatures waiting for us. And if the creature we had just faced was anything to go by, we were in serious trouble. We need to get out of this canyon before something else finds us, Dara said firmly. If that creature comes this way, we'll be trapped. Without another word, we began to move quickly, but quietly, making our way along the edge of the canyon. The sticky web substance was everywhere, and it was starting to get thicker the farther we went. I could feel my heart racing as I kept my eyes on the ground, careful not to step into any of the webbing. I had no idea what would happen if I did, but I didn't want to find out. As we moved further along the canyon, the air grew colder, and the strange energy that had been humming around us began to grow stronger. I could feel it pressing down on me, like the planet itself was watching us. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was stronger now. We weren't alone. Suddenly, there was a noise, quiet at first, like the scraping of claws against stone. Then it got louder. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that the creature was closing in on us again. We had been running, but now we were trapped. There was nowhere to go. We need to move now, Max shouted. We turned, ready to sprint, but before we could take another step, a loud screech filled the air. From the shadows of the canyon, something massive charged toward us. It was another creature, even bigger than the one we had just fought. Its body was covered in dark, leathery armor, and its eyes glowed an eerie yellow. It moved with terrifying speed, and it was coming straight for us. I froze for a moment, panic taking over. How were we supposed to fight something like this? Run, Dara shouted. We bolted down the canyon, the creature hot on our heels. It was faster than the first one, and it seemed to know exactly where we were going. The sound of its claws scraping against the stone grew louder as it chased us, and I could feel the vibrations in the ground with every step it took. I pushed myself harder, trying to keep up with the others. My legs were burning, but I couldn't afford to stop. Not now. We reached a bend in the canyon, and I thought we might finally lose the creature. But when I rounded the corner, I saw something worse. There was another creature waiting for us. This one was smaller than the others, but it was just as deadly. It had sharp, glowing teeth and claws like knives, and it was blocking the way forward. "Go back," Liam shouted. "We can't go this way." We turned around, but the larger creature was already catching up. The canyon had become a maze of dead ends, and we were trapped in the middle of it. I didn't know what to do. There was no way out, and the creatures were closing in. Panic started to rise in my chest. But then I remembered what Dara had said earlier. We had to use the terrain to our advantage. Maybe the creatures knew this place better than we did, but we weren't completely powerless. "Over here," I shouted. I had noticed a narrow ledge on the side of the canyon wall. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. It was too narrow for the creatures to fit through, but it might be wide enough for us to climb. I reached for the wall and began to scramble up, hoping the others would follow. Max hesitated for a moment but quickly followed, his face tight with fear. Dara and Liam weren't far behind. We climbed up the rocky wall, our fingers scraping against the rough surface. The ledge was narrow, but it was just wide enough to keep us out of reach of the creatures below. The larger one screeched in frustration, but it couldn't get to us. Once we were all safely on the ledge, we stopped for a moment to catch our breath. We were safe, at least for now, but I could still hear the creatures growling below us, and the quiet hum of the strange energy was still pressing down on us. We hadn't escaped the danger. We had just delayed it. "We need to keep moving," Dara said after a few moments of silence. "This isn't over." She was right. We had barely survived our first dangerous encounter, and we still had to reach the central tower. But the creatures were out there, waiting for us. And now, the real challenge had just begun. This wasn't just about surviving the creatures. It was about surviving the planet itself. As we began to move again, I knew that this test would push us to our limits. But I also knew something else. If we stuck together, we might just have a chance to make it out of this alive. The ledge we had climbed to gave us a moment to catch our breath, but it also made me realize something I hadn't fully understood before. The test we were facing wasn't just about surviving the dangerous creatures or navigating this strange planet. It was something much deeper, something that hit closer to home. As we stood there, watching the creatures below growling in frustration, a quiet tension filled the air. We were safe for now, but I could feel the pressure building. The longer we stayed in this strange place, the more the emotional weight of it all started to sink in. We were far from home, stuck in a world full of unknown dangers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all slowly being pushed to our breaking points. Max was the first to speak. His voice was quieter than usual, and I could hear the weariness in it. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," he said, his eyes looking far away, as if he were talking more to himself than to us. I wanted to say something, to offer encouragement, but I wasn't sure what to say. I felt it too, the fear, the exhaustion, and the overwhelming weight of the unknown. But we had to keep going. We didn't have a choice. Dara, always the calm one, turned to us with a serious look. "We're not alone in this. We have each other. That's what's going to get us through." Her words were comforting, but they didn't completely erase the feeling of isolation I felt. It wasn't just the danger of the creatures that bothered me. It was the feeling that we were stranded, that no one knew where we were, and no one was coming to save us. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how out of control I felt. We were on our own. Liam seemed to understand what I was feeling, and without saying a word, he stepped closer to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and gave me a reassuring squeeze. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that we weren't completely alone. We were in this together. I nodded, trying to push my worries aside. "You're right," I said quietly. "We just need to keep going. We'll make it out of here. We have to." But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true. I didn't know if we would make it out. I didn't know if we were ready for what was ahead. But I also knew that I couldn't let myself give up. Not yet. Not while we were still fighting. "We need to find a way to communicate with Professor Zor," Max said, breaking the silence. "He said we had to make it to the central tower, but I don't even know how to get there. This planet is huge, and we're running out of time." It was a good point. We didn't have any way of knowing where the tower was, or what else this planet had in store for us. All we knew was that the longer we stayed on the run, the more dangerous things seemed to get. "Let's keep moving," Dara said, her voice steady. "We've survived so far, and we can keep going. We just have to keep our heads on straight and think about our next move." I agreed with her. There was no point in standing around, worrying about things we couldn't control. The only thing we could control was how we responded to the challenges ahead. As we began to move again, I felt a strange sense of determination. I wasn't sure where that feeling came from, but it pushed me forward. I had to keep moving. If I stopped, if I allowed myself to get overwhelmed, then everything we had fought for so far would be for nothing. The canyon walls around us were steep, and the path ahead was narrow. The further we walked, the more I realized how quiet it had become. The creatures had stopped chasing us for now, but the silence was almost worse than the danger. It made everything feel more intense, more surreal, as if we were trapped in some strange dream, unable to wake up. "We're getting close to something," Liam said suddenly, his eyes scanning the landscape ahead. "I think I see something in the distance." We all stopped, turning our attention to the horizon. There, in the distance, I could see the faint outline of a large structure, tall, dark, and almost alien in its design. It had to be the central tower. I could feel a surge of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but we were closer than we had been. "We have to reach that tower," Dara said, her voice filled with purpose. "We'll find answers there." But even as she spoke, I couldn't shake the unease growing inside me. I had spent so much time focusing on the physical dangers of this place, on the creatures and the terrain, that I hadn't fully considered the emotional toll it was taking on all of us. We were constantly on edge, never knowing when the next threat would appear, or when one of us might falter under the pressure. The closer we got to the tower, the more the weight of it all seemed to bear down on me. I felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, it was all starting to take its toll. I had always prided myself on being strong, on keeping my emotions in check. But here, on this alien planet, everything felt different. The challenges were no longer just physical. They were mental, emotional, and they were testing everything I thought I knew about myself. I glanced around at the others. Max, Dara, and Liam all seemed to be pushing through the exhaustion, but I could see the strain in their eyes. Max's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to grow with each step. Dara, who had always been calm under pressure, looked more tense than usual, her lips pressed into a thin line as she focused on the path ahead. And Liam, he was quieter than usual, his eyes darting around as if he were constantly searching for danger. We were all feeling it. The stress, the pressure, the fear. We weren't just fighting the creatures or the environment. We were fighting ourselves. I couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this up. How long could we push forward before the emotional weight of it all broke us? It wasn't just about surviving the tests or passing the exam. It was about staying together, staying strong, and staying sane. As we reached the base of the tower, I felt a sense of relief. We had made it, but the journey wasn't over. We still had to face whatever came next, and I realized that, despite the fear and exhaustion, I wasn't alone. We were all in this together, and that was something I could hold on to. "This is it," Dara said, her voice firm, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "We made it, but we don't know what's inside." We all stood there for a moment, looking up at the tower. The dark, looming structure seemed to tower over us, as if it were watching us. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, but at the same time, I felt a small glimmer of hope. We had made it this far. And no matter what came next, we would face it together. This isn't just about surviving the planet, Liam said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. It's about surviving ourselves. We have to trust each other. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the friends around me. We had been tested in ways we never could have imagined, but in the end, it was our bond, our ability to support each other, that had gotten us this far. The real challenge wasn't just the monsters or the planet. It was how we dealt with the emotional toll of it all. And as long as we stuck together, I knew we had a chance. "We can do this," Max said, his voice strong again, even though I could tell he was tired. "We've come too far to turn back now." With that, we stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead in the tower. And as we walked, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting for something more. For the people beside me, for the strength we shared, and for the hope that we could make it through this together. And that, I realized, was the true test. We stood at the base of the tower, gazing up at the towering structure. It loomed above us like a giant, dark sentinel, casting a long shadow over the landscape. The air around it felt charged, as though something was waiting to happen. My heart raced, not just from the physical exhaustion we had endured, but from the realization that we had made it this far. But it wasn't over yet. We still had to enter the tower, and whatever lay inside could be more dangerous than anything we'd faced so far. "We can't just stand here," Dara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but I could see the unease in her eyes. "We have to keep moving." Max nodded, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet resolve. "Yeah, we're too close now to turn back. Let's go." We exchanged looks, each of us silently agreeing that we couldn't afford to hesitate. We'd made it this far together, and we would face whatever came next as a team. That was the only way we could survive. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, my feet crunching on the rocky ground. The others followed closely behind, and we made our way to the entrance of the tower. The door was massive, almost like it had been built for giants. There were no handles, no buttons, nothing to suggest how to open it. But as we approached, a low hum filled the air, and the door slowly began to shift. It moved with a strange fluidity, almost as though it were alive. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. "Looks like we're expected," Liam said, his voice a little shaky but still filled with curiosity. "Let's see what's inside." The door opened fully, revealing a vast, empty hallway. The walls were made of smooth, dark metal that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The air inside was cold, and the silence was almost deafening. We hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. We had come so far, and there was no way we could leave without answers. As we stepped inside, the door closed behind us with a soft thud, sealing us in. We stood in the silence for a moment, just taking it all in. The hallway stretched ahead, and at the far end, we could see a faint glow, a light coming from somewhere deeper inside the tower. It was the only source of illumination, and it seemed to pull us toward it, as though the tower itself was guiding us forward. "Stay alert," Dara whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. "We don't know what we're dealing with." We nodded, and one by one, we began to move down the hallway. The air felt thick, as though we were walking through something more than just space. It was as if the very atmosphere of the tower was different, almost alive. It made me feel uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. We had no choice but to keep going. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every step we took echoed in the hall, making it feel like we weren't alone. I glanced at the others, but they were all focused on the path ahead, just as determined as I was to get to the end of this journey. The hallway twisted and turned, becoming more complex with each step. It was like a maze, and the walls seemed to shift, changing the way we moved forward. I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the more we walked, the more disoriented I felt. Suddenly, the hall opened up into a massive chamber, and we were struck by the sight before us. The room was enormous, with a high ceiling that seemed to disappear into darkness. In the center of the room was a raised platform, glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. It was like something out of a dream. But it wasn't the beauty that caught my attention. It was the sense of power radiating from the platform. It was as if the entire room was pulsing with energy. "What is that?" Max whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think we're alone here." As soon as the words left my mouth, the room seemed to come alive. The walls around us shifted, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating in my chest. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and I felt a sudden surge of fear. "It's a trap," Liam shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The chamber suddenly erupted with a burst of light, blinding us for a moment. When the light faded, we saw it, the figure standing on the platform, cloaked in a shimmering, almost ethereal robe. It was an alien, but unlike anything we had ever seen before. Its skin was smooth and translucent, glowing faintly with the same light that filled the chamber. Its eyes were large and black, like endless pools of darkness, and it seemed to be watching us with an intense gaze. "Welcome," the alien said, its voice both distant and familiar, echoing through the room as though it came from everywhere at once. "I have been waiting for you." We froze, unsure of what to do or say. My heart raced in my chest, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It was as if it had the power to pull me in, to make me feel small and insignificant. "Who are you?" Dara asked, her voice steady, though I could hear the fear hidden beneath the calm exterior. "I am the one who has been testing you," the alien said, its voice resonating in my mind as much as it did in the air around us. "And you have passed the first challenge, but there is more to come." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had thought the creatures, the traps, and the planet itself had been the challenges. But this was something else entirely. This was the turning point. This was the moment everything changed. The alien stepped forward, and the platform beneath it seemed to shift, lowering slightly. "You have come far," it said, its voice filled with a strange kind of reverence. "But you are not yet ready. You must face the ultimate test, not of your strength, but of your heart." I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me. The ultimate test. What did that mean? "Your bonds will be tested," the alien continued, its eyes narrowing as it looked directly at us. "The choices you make here will determine not just your survival, but your future. The path ahead will be filled with doubt, fear, and confusion. But only those who can remain true to themselves will succeed." I glanced at the others, and I could see the confusion and fear in their eyes. We had come this far together, but now we were facing something even more dangerous. The test of our emotions, our trust in each other, and our very sense of self. "What do we have to do?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. The alien didn't answer immediately. Instead, it raised its hand, and the chamber seemed to shift again. Suddenly, images flashed before my eyes. Memories, fears, and doubts. It was as if the alien was probing my mind, forcing me to confront everything I had been avoiding.